This may be the moment the war truly breaks. Not with a treaty, not with a speech, but with silence on the battlefield. Right now, in eastern Ukraine, an entire Russian force may be disappearing from the map. Not retreating, not redeploying, but trapped. Tens of thousands of soldiers cut off from fuel, from food, from ammunition, from command. If this is confirmed, it is not a tactical setback. It is a systemic collapse. I want you to understand something clearly. Empires do not fall when they lose battles. They fall when their systems stop working, when arrogance replaces strategy, when propaganda replaces reality. I've spent my life studying how nations unravel, and this pattern is unmistakable. If you care about where this war is going, if you care about what comes next for Europe, for global power, for stability, stay with me. Because before we can understand what just happened, we must understand what everyone got wrong. To understand this moment, we must strip away the noise. For more than 2 years, this war has been framed as a contest of endurance. Who has more men, more shells, more tolerance for pain? That framing is dangerously incomplete, because modern wars are not won by exhaustion alone. They are won or lost by systems, logistics, command structure, intelligence, morale, economic depth, and the ability to adapt faster than your opponent. Russia entered this war believing mass could compensate for weakness. Ukraine entered it knowing precision had to compensate for scarcity. What we are witnessing now is the collision of those two worldviews. This is not about one city, not about one offensive, not even about one pocket on a map. This is about whether a centralized, opaque, authoritarian system can survive a transparent, adaptive, networked form of warfare. And here is the uncomfortable truth. When such systems fail, they do not fail gradually. They fail suddenly. To see why, we need to go back before the encirclement, before the headlines, to the battlefield logic that made this outcome possible. For months before this moment, the battlefield told a quiet story, one many chose not to hear. Eastern Ukraine became a war of attrition. Slow, brutal, industrial. Russian forces concentrated immense firepower on narrow objectives. Cities turned into symbols. Symbols turned into obsessions. The logic was familiar. Grind forward, absorb losses. Assume the opponent will break first. But history teaches us something unforgiving. Attrition favors the side with resilient systems, not just larger numbers. As Russia poured men and ammunition into frontal assaults, it created imbalance elsewhere. Front lines stretched, reserve quality declined. Command focus narrowed. What emerged was not a solid wall, but a bulge. A protruding mass of territory held at enormous cost and defended by tired, uneven units. In classical military theory, this is a warning sign. Extended salience invite encirclement. Overcommitment creates vulnerability. Ukraine did not rush. It observed. It mapped patterns. It waited. And while much of the world debated where the next Ukrainian move might come, the conditions for something far larger were quietly being assembled. The crisis did not begin with an attack. It began with a miscalculation. The first rupture did not come with spectacle. It came with precision. Ukraine did not strike where Russia was strongest. It struck where Russia assumed it was safe. Supply routes, command nodes, the thin connective tissue holding a massive force together. Within hours, Russian units began reporting the same message: confusion, orders delayed, ammunition late, fuel missing. This is how modern collapse begins. Not with defeat, but with disorientation. Ukraine's operation was not loud. It was coordinated. Multiple thrusts, synchronized in time, aimed not at cities but at arteries. When those arteries closed, something irreversible happened. Units that could fight no longer knew how to move. Units that could advance no longer knew where to go. I want you to notice this. Because wars are not decided at the front line alone, they are decided in the spaces behind it, where logistics, trust, and command reside. This was not luck. It was planning. And when planning meets exhaustion, the result is not resistance. It is fracture. If you are trying to understand why this moment matters, remember this. The first crisis is always invisible to those trapped inside it. And that is exactly what makes the second crisis so devastating. What we are seeing is not simply a battlefield maneuver. It is the exposure of a deeper mechanism. Large armies depend on flow of information, flow of fuel, flow of ammunition, flow of trust between commanders and soldiers. When that flow is interrupted, size becomes a liability. The Russian system is highly centralized. Decisions move upward, orders move downward. When communication breaks, initiative disappears. Ukraine understood this asymmetry. Instead of fighting mass with mass, it targeted connectivity. Roads instead of regiments, junctions instead of battalions, timing instead of territory. This is systems warfare. Once supply routes are severed, an army does not merely slow down. It begins to decay. Vehicles stop. Artillery falls silent. Medical care collapses. Morale erodes. And here is the critical point. In authoritarian systems, failure cannot be acknowledged quickly. Bad news is delayed. Reality is softened. Responsibility is avoided. By the time truth reaches the top, the damage is already done. This is why encirclements are so dangerous. They do not just trap troops, they trap decision-making. And when decisions freeze, time becomes the deadliest weapon of all. The system does not collapse at once. It collapses layer by layer, which brings us to the second crisis. The second crisis begins when hope runs out. At first, encircled units wait. They expect orders, relief, a corridor to open. Then hours pass. Then days. Supplies thin. Radius fall silent. Promises remain unanswered. This is the moment when military reality collides with political illusion. For the soldiers inside the pocket, the war shrinks. The front line is no longer kilometers wide. It is the distance between the next meal and none at all. For commanders, every option is catastrophic. A breakout means slaughter. Surrender means humiliation. Waiting means slow destruction. And above them all, a leadership structure unable to admit failure. Authoritarian systems do not adapt well under pressure. They double down. They delay. They deny. This is where panic begins. Not publicly, but internally. Intercepted messages speak of confusion, fear, and abandonment. Once morale breaks, firepower follows. An army without supplies can still fight briefly. An army without belief cannot fight at all. This is why encirclements are feared across history. They compress time. They remove choice. And when choice disappears, outcomes accelerate. What happens next does not stay on the battlefield, because the consequences do not stop with soldiers. They reach people. Now, I want you to step away from the maps. Imagine you are a parent, a spouse, a sibling. You are not watching a briefing. You are waiting for a message that does not come. For the families of those trapped inside the pocket, this war suddenly becomes intimate. Phones go silent. Rumors replace facts. State television offers slogans instead of answers. This is the human cost. Authoritarian systems always hide until they can't. Inside the encirclement, soldiers are no longer thinking about strategy. They are thinking about hunger, about untreated wounds, about whether anyone still remembers they exist. And you, watching this from afar, must understand something uncomfortable. These soldiers were not asked whether this war made sense. They were sent. When systems fail, it is ordinary people who pay first, not generals, not politicians, This is why moments like this matter, because they expose the real price of denial. If you believe wars are abstractions, look here. If you believe propaganda protects societies, look here. History does not turn on speeches. It turns when people see reality clearly and refuse to look away. And that clarity is now spreading beyond the battlefield. What happens in one frozen pocket of eastern Ukraine does not stay there. Wars reshape systems far beyond their front lines. And this moment is already reverberating through capitals, markets, and alliances. In Washington and across Europe, calculations are shifting in real time. Support that was once cautious now looks consequential. Weapons, once debated, now appear decisive. This is not sentiment. It is strategic logic. When a smaller country demonstrates that advanced coordination, intelligence, and precision can dismantle a larger force, the global balance recalibrates. In Moscow, the opposite reaction takes hold. Silence. Blame. Fracture. Narratives crack when outcomes contradict them too clearly. For countries watching from the sidelines, from Asia to the global south, the lesson is sobering. Power today is not just about numbers. It is about adaptability. Backing strength matters. Backing credibility matters more. And when momentum shifts, alliances follow. This is how wars redraw influence without treaties. Quietly. Relentlessly. What we are witnessing is not simply a military event. It is a signal that the era of assumed dominance is ending, but endings are never clean. They open futures, and those futures now hinge on choices yet to be made. From this moment forward, the war does not have one future. It has three. The first is the best case. The encirclement holds, supplies run out, resistance collapses, large numbers of troops surrender. This would mark a decisive shift, not just militarily, but psychologically. Ukraine would regain territory rapidly. Negotiations, if they come, would be shaped by strength, not desperation. The second path is darker. A desperate attempt to break the encirclement. Massed forces ordered forward, heavy losses accepted as necessary. History is filled with such decisions. They rarely end well. They trade short-term optics for long-term ruin. The third path is the most dangerous. Denial prolonged, reality postponed, the pocket resupplied imperfectly, the war frozen inside a siege. This path stretches suffering without changing the outcome. It drains resources. It hardens positions. It increases the risk of escalation beyond Ukraine's borders. Here is the deeper truth. Systems that cannot admit failure lose the ability to choose wisely. They confuse endurance with strength. They mistake delay for control. The future of this war will not be decided by ideology. It will be decided by whether leaders respond to reality or hide from it. And that brings us to the final question. What does this moment demand of us? Moments like this are rare. They do not announce themselves with certainty. They arrive as openings. What we are witnessing is not just a possible military defeat. It is a test of systems, of truth versus illusion, of adaptability versus denial. If this encirclement holds, it will be remembered not for the number of troops involved, but for what it revealed. That power built on secrecy fractures under pressure. That coordination can defeat mass. That courage, when paired with intelligence and allies, can change history. For Ukraine, this is about sovereignty. For Russia, it is about reckoning. For the world, it is about learning quickly. Because the lesson is not confined to this war. It applies to how we govern, how we invest, how we respond when systems show strain. You and I are living inside an inflection point. What happens next will shape security, economics, and global trust for years. So do not look away. Do not reduce this to a headline. Stay engaged. Ask better questions. Demand clarity over comfort. And if you want to understand what comes after this moment, not just on the battlefield, but in the world. It reshapes. Then stay with me. Because this story is not ending. It is entering its most consequential chapter,